Our commencement speaker today has been acclaimed by many as one of the finest filmmakers of his generation or any generation. I could go on for quite a few minutes about the many awards and honors that Errol Morris has won in his illustrious career. They include the Oscar, the Emmy, the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance, a Guggenheim, a MacArthur even, an Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America. It's his exquisite body of work and documentary, however, 8 feature-length works for which Errol is most widely celebrated. These films include such classics as The Fog of War, which centered on Robert F. McNamara and the Vietnam War, and The Thin Blue Line, in which a real-life murder was solved and a wrongful conviction overturned. He writes and blogs for the New York Times as well. When it comes to describing Errol's work, it's hard for me to top the following words of film critic Roger Ebert. He wrote the following: "After 20 years of reviewing film, I haven't found a filmmaker who intrigues me more. Errol Morris is like a magician and as great a filmmaker as Hitchcock and Fellini." Some months ago, the students in the class of 2010 asked me to see if we could lure Errol here to give the commencement address. And I'm so proud and happy to say that we were successful. It's a privilege to welcome Errol Morris to Berkeley.
Would like to thank Dean Henry, John Else, and of course the class of 2010 for inviting me here today. Thank you. I also should briefly remind people I was urged not even to talk at this commencement by the various people picketing outside. So we should keep them and their quite reasonable demands in mind. By the way, this came in the form of a series of emails from various people in the School of Journalism. And I thought, gee, this is what journalism is supposed to be about. It's about protesting inequities, bringing to the attention of a wider public things that we think are wrong. And so, of course, I would be remiss by not mentioning their effort to get me not to talk here at all. But I'm sorry, I'm doing it anyway. I'm not sure if it's the right thing, but I am doing it anyway, and thank you very much for inviting me. I heard a lot just this morning. I wrote something. I'm not sure whether I should read it or not. But I heard a lot this morning about journalism being a profession. And I have to most respectfully disagree. I'm not sure that it's a profession, but there is one thing that I'm absolutely certain about. It's an obsession. It's about going down rabbit holes, maybe one rabbit hole after another, without the promise of ever returning. And I think it's one of the things that makes journalism so extraordinary and so interesting. That you're actually trying to figure out something about the world. You're trying to take a puzzle, what is the world really like, and put it together to arrive at a picture of reality, to arrive at truth. And to me, in that sense, it's not perhaps only the highest profession, it's the highest obsession that there is. When I was first asked to give a commencement address at a school of journalism, I thought, well, this seems truly inappropriate because I'm not a journalist. And then I thought a little bit about it, and I thought, well, maybe I am a journalist, but I just have never clearly realized it. And I think that is closer to the truth. As I wrote here, I said I started to reflect on what I've been doing for the last 30 years or so, and I started to think maybe, just maybe, I am a journalist. I started around the corner from here at the Pacific Film Archive. I don't know if you're aware of this place. I was a student at the University of California. I was a graduate student in philosophy here. It was part of the University Art Museum, and I started going to films, and thanks to the kindness of Tom Luddy, who is here today, who ran the PFA, started programming films, particularly film noir. There are many things I liked about noir, but in particular there are images of one benighted character after another struggling to make sense of the world, and sometimes failing in the effort, failing miserably. There is a line in a Robert Mitchum film noir which has motivated me through most of my career. This is how I remember the line. I went back to look at the film itself to see if I could find it, and I couldn't find it again. So maybe I just made it up. It's just a figment, it's a figment of my imagination, but it's a line I like anyway, so I should quote it, even if I'm just quoting myself. Mitchum says something to the effect, I could see the frame, but I couldn't see the picture. Well, that sums up journalism for me. But I would put my own interpretation, my own spin on it. For me, Mitchum is saying, I could see that there was something terribly wrong, but I wasn't sure what it was. It's the detective's intuition that the story doesn't add up, that it doesn't make sense, that something is missing. There's a logical inconsistency. It's the attempt to put the world back together again to make sense of it. I've often wondered why we need the phrase investigative journalism. I don't know if other people have been puzzled by this, by the way. Investigative journalism. Isn't all journalism supposed to be investigative? Am I missing something here? Isn't journalism without an investigative element nothing more than gossip? I think so. And so I have gone from one crazy, obsessive investigation to another. The Thin Blue Line was my attempt to put together a story about what I realized was a miscarriage of justice. But this is another feature of journalism I should mention, because I think it's relevant to what your experience will be. Everything I have set out to investigate, I've always ended up in some radically different place from where I've started, much to my surprise. I went to Dallas to do a movie about a Dallas psychiatrist named Dr. Death, Dr. James Grigson. And I ended up overturning a capital murder conviction. A man who was sentenced to death for a crime he did not commit. Actually, a man who came within 3 days of being electrocuted in Huntsville, Texas. Something, by the way, that I'm very, very proud of, and proof, I believe, that journalism can make a difference, investigation can make a difference. Certainly, it made a difference in his life. Forgive me for reading a brief section here again. I know that many of this graduating class are involved with documentary filmmaking. That's terrific. There's something you should know. When I first started working on the Thin Blue Line, I thought the camera was an obstacle to any real investigation. How can you investigate anything with lights, a film crew, cameras, et cetera, et cetera? How could something like that possibly ever work? The camera turned out to be one more tool among many, and surprisingly, a very powerful tool for gathering evidence. How could I have predicted in the course of an interview one witness after another would give evidence that they had committed perjury? Of course, this evidence could have been produced with a notebook and a pen, but there was something powerful and arresting about seeing it on film. And it's a reminder that there is no correct way to pursuing the truth. There is no formula, no algorithm that you put something in the meat grinder and truth emerges in the end. It's something that is a quest, properly considered. It's something that you battle with in everything that you do. You just have to do what you do in the best way you know how. You have to figure it out every single time for yourself. And here's another, and I will try to be brief here. You can stop me at any time. A scientist tries to come up with general laws, but there are no general laws to be found in the chaos of everyday life. We're forced to make sense of experience the best we can. A scientist can repeat an experiment over and over again and come up with the same results. Human events are one-offs. They occur only once, and the effort to repeat them never comes close to the first time around. And this brings me to the central problem of journalism. We often do not realize that history is perishable. Maybe it's like cheese. It depends on evidence. There are countless stories where evidence is lost, corrupted, or hidden, and hence attempts to reassemble a picture of reality is doomed at best. If we lose all the evidence of the Battle of Hastings, what could we say about it? Now, I sort of like this line, correct me if I'm wrong here about liking it. Journalism may be the first draft of history, but sometimes it's the only draft. You are out there collecting evidence which, if you were not there, might be lost forever. It's really how it works. Yeah. Redundancy is the spice of life, so I'll say it again. Journalism may be the first draft of history, but sometimes it's the only draft. It gives us the hope of exploring things before we know what to think about them, before there is any consensus about what to think. Again, it's our hope of finding things out, of uncovering the truth. It's become fashionable nowadays to speak of the subjectivity or the relativity of truth. I find such talk ridiculous at best. Let's go back to the guy that I got out of prison in Texas, Randall Dale Adams, and his possible execution in Huntsville, Texas. He found himself within 3 days of being executed in Old Sparky, the electric chair at Walls Unit, Huntsville, Texas, a death chamber that I myself am quite familiar with. I spent a lot of time there, kind of they had gone to lethal injection, but I would spend a lot of time trying to peek into the crates where Old Sparky had been stored. I'd like to remind everybody here, there's nothing postmodern about the electric chair. It takes a human being and turns him into a piece of meat. Imagine you, the young journalists of tomorrow, being strapped into an electric chair for a crime you did not commit. Would you take comfort from a witness telling you that it really doesn't make any difference whether you're guilty or innocent, that there is no truth? I think you're guilty. You think you're innocent. Can't we all work it out? My simple answer to that question is no, we can't. They're facts. There's a world in which things happen, and a journalist's job is to figure out what those things are. Anything less is giving up on the most important task around, separating truth from illusion, truth from fantasy, truth from wishful thinking. This is so many things I could say, but I think this is really enough to think about. I was recently given this job. You know, I wanted to do an ad for them, but they don't do those ads anymore. I got my job through the New York Times. I wrote here, saddled with my new job at the Times, I wondered whether this was any way to earn a living. I told my editor, this seems like a job at a fast food restaurant. but at least I don't have to wear a hairnet and there's no drug testing. And he answered, well, so far. Let me return to the original thought. Of course, it's more than a job. It's an obsession. It's essential. We can't do without journalism, and we can't do without journalists. How else are we to figure out what's going on out in the world? So thank you very, very much, and it's an honor to be here today.